Okay, I think we're live. It is April 6, 2020. My name is Greg Farrar, and I'm doing my daily edition of the coronavirus COVID-19 live stream trend analysis. I'll be analyzing trends at the country level. Coronavirus. Need to do this again. At the country level, the U.S. state level, and the California county level. And I'll be mostly analyzing number of new cases and the growth of those, but also I'll probably take a look at testing and deaths. So, starting from the top, we have our total cases by country. I think I actually just added this report. You may not even notice because I have totals for the other two categories, but I don't usually pay attention to totals, but a lot of people have been talking about totals. This seems to be sort of the first graph that people look at, that you see on the news and so on, so I figured sure I'll throw it in. But as we're going to see today, it appears that the United States has just had a sharp downturn in the number of new cases. And that's not at all clear from this graph. If you look really closely, you might be able to guess that this is only going up by 25,000 instead of 35,000 like it has in recent days, or rather the world is not the United States, the world and the United States actually. But it's not so clear until you look down at the daily cases. When you look at the daily cases, you see the number of new daily cases, you see that that by country, oh yeah, that was the United States I was pointing to. I did also add a full world graph here. Kept talking about doing it, and I did, and we'll get to see it in a minute. But on the United States level, you can see there's been an obvious, fairly consistent trend upwards of new cases, more new cases every day, though the growth of the number of new cases every day has been dropping. We have maybe 8% more cases, and then 6% more cases, and then 5% more cases on succeeding days. It's always been up, almost always. But today, if this data is to be believed, we have a sudden drop of 10,000 cases, a lot fewer cases, new cases today. So the first question is the data to be believed? Well, I'm going to wait a couple days before I make any sort of even partially final determination on that. But I will say there's one reason to believe so and one reason to maybe believe not. The one is that when you go to the CDC website, it agrees with this data. It does show that the total cases has grown by only 25,000 today. However, as we're going to see in New York's numbers, for some reason, New York State is late, it appears, and the New York State website says so. These stats are not up to date because of delays in reporting. So it's possible that New York hasn't reported, and therefore, because New York didn't report, then this doesn't include New York, and that could account for it. My guess is this is actually real, that it's not the specific New York reporting that's being rolled into the CDC numbers, but other information, and they probably have ways of correcting, for instance, by looking at the per county numbers that we have. But we'll have to see. But if this is true, it's good news. We're certainly seeing a drop of new cases in New York, in the United States and in New York. Drop of new cases in the United States for the first time, and maybe this is finally starting to show the United States crossing that zero line in the growth. By the way, I'm going to throw a little calculus in here. Nobody needs to know calculus for this presentation, so don't be alarmed, but it seems a shame because this is just begging for those, even with a rudimentary knowledge of calculus, to look at this data from the perspective of calculus. Calculus is about changes over time in a function, and so if we look at the total number of cases, if we think of this as our function going upwards, the amount that it's changing each time is the first derivative. And so what this one actually tracks is the first derivative of that first function. What we're going to go to next, though, is, and the thing that I've been focusing on a lot, is actually the second derivative, which is to say it answers the question of how fast does this change? And in particular, if this thing ever levels off and goes flat, Your basic calculus will tell you the slope there is 0, and the second derivative should become 0. So this is the second derivative of the total number of cases. And when I talk about that 0 line, I'm really talking about whether the second derivative has gone to 0, which is to say whether the first derivative curve has turned around, which is to say whether the top curve is starting to flatten out. So I'm not going to talk too much more about calculus, but a couple people have mentioned to me, hey, aren't you talking about the second derivative? Just for kicks, it's also worth mentioning there was this point around March 15th when this curve leveled out, when the slope of this became 0. If we cared about when that happened, when the world as a whole had started to turn around towards lower growth, that would take the third derivative graph. And if we had graphed all of these, which we could, but I haven't, we could see that when the third derivative graph crossed 0, that's when this graph becomes flat, and then the third derivative would start to drop into the negative territory. Now when this one, the growth in daily cases, the second derivative graph, when this drops into negative territory, that means that the number of new cases is starting to head is also starting to head downwards. When this is negative, the number of cases is dropping day over day. So I'm sort of flipping around a lot here. I'm not going to do much more calculus now, but I will say the per capita cases per million, which lets us compare these numbers better. Spain is the leader in per capita by a fair amount. Belgium continues to be on this runaway growth. We'll see in the next whether it's really growing exponentially. It looks fairly flat, so it's probably not a serious exponential runaway epidemic there, and no one really seems to have those right now, by the way. Maybe at some of the smaller scales we can't see, but no one here is having this curve shoot higher and higher, which would indicate runaway, increasing more and more growth each day, and more new cases each day. Or rather, more and more new, I'm not sure how to say this. The growth of the number of new cases would be getting higher and higher. We'll see that. Let's just hop to the next graph. But first, take a moment to say Switzerland, Italy, and can't seem to grab this one quite. Who are you? Austria. Switzerland, Italy, and Austria are those that have turned the corner. They did flatten out here. That's where we see them hitting 0 in the next graph. And now they're heading downward. Those three countries have really turned the corner and are seeing not just a decreased growth of rate of growth in their new cases, but they're actually seeing fewer and fewer new cases each day. And that's what we're seeing just for one day in the United States here. If that trend continues like this, and we again have no idea if it will, no particular reason to believe it will, but it is possible. If that continues, then the United States also, which I'll flash here for a minute, will turn around. I'm just going to show United States by itself. This is the same shape as the other one, but per million. There was a moment here where it looked like it had flattened out and was heading downward, but it fooled us, headed up, up, up. Now there's a moment where again it looks like it might be flattening out and heading down, but one data point is not enough to talk about. But my favorite graph is the rope chart. Main thing to see on the rope chart, the broad trend of growth for all countries is headed downward. Around March 14th, 13th, 15th, the world turned a corner in its growth trends and started seeing the growth rates dropping. Doesn't mean we're not getting more and more cases each day. These countries all see more and more cases each day because they're above 0 in growth. But it does mean that they're all heading, I think all, at this point, we'll zoom in, I think maybe every single one of them with the possible exception of Denmark. Denmark is looking fairly flat here on the growth curve, but every other country in the world, well, okay, I'm only doing the top 25 countries here. The smaller countries very well may be seeing exponential growth. We do not, for instance, have India here. And so if we graphed all the countries of the world, there would probably be some that were heading upwards, maybe even sharply upwards. But of the top 25, the ones that are really contributing to cases right now, they are all on the mend. They're all heading south. And this is, in a good way, heading south, including Turkey, which is the sharpest down. Turkey seems to do everything bigger than the rest of the world. Had a bigger up, has a bigger down, and now it is recovering faster, but it hasn't fully recovered yet. But it's awfully close. If we zoom in on Turkey directly, we will see that it is pretty much, well, the trend line heads to zero, but we haven't actually seen any 0 points now. This is just our guess that since we see fewer and fewer all the time, it's likely to cross zero, but the 3 latest ones have actually been substantial growth, so very much just a trend line, not to be believed as a real prediction of what's to come, but still, it's good news that the trend line hit zero. That indicates a trend. Down at the bottom here, we have the winners, the odd couple, Austria and Australia, which stay oddly close together, presumably because of their names. South Korea here, which is also doing really well. Austria and Australia both doing a 20% daily drop in new cases. That is huge. Those two are headed right out of the top 25. It's not going to be long before we see them disappear entirely if they manage to drop their new cases by 20% a day. Switzerland, which also was a real problem spot for a while, is now looking quite good with a 10% growth rate according to the trend curve. Spain, also a terrible hot spot, looking very good. It's turned the corner some days ago, apparently. The trends continue for Spain. Let me take a look at Spain, though, because I see a red dot up there, and I just want to check and see if that's Spain. Nope, it isn't. Spain's dots are still good. Last 3 days, all below zero, some other days below zero. Spain really does, at this point, I think, especially since each of these dots is an average of 3 days and cancels out some noise that way, I think we can safely say Spain is doing well and is over this and is heading down into lower and lower growth until eventually it'll have no new cases at all, until the next wave. Italy, not doing quite as sharply well, but also having turned the corner 5 some days ago. What I love about this graph is it tells us what the news is going to say in a week. This graph says that back on March 29th, we could have said, and probably did, oh look, Italy is turning a corner. And now today in the news you read, oh, Italy seems to have turned a corner. It's like it takes a while for those trends to be visible. This is the second derivative again. For those to make any sort of real impression on the first derivative, for it to bend downward in the new cases, it takes a while, and for that then if you look at the total growth curve for in Italy, the total cases, you can see why people still think there's a problem, because it's like, look at that, it's going up and up, more cases every day, it's terrible, and it is terrible, but the trend is good. We're seeing fewer and fewer new cases each day, even though the total number of cases will always rise. And then we have a few others. So Switzerland's looking good. See if I can find a place to grab this one. We have, that's Spain? That's Spain? I thought we already looked at Spain. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so I don't get lost in the details. This is actually Spain. Spain is doing well. Yeah, and then there's just a whole cluster here. Portugal, that's a point for Spain. Israel, Italy, Czech Republic, Netherlands, Portugal, France. All of these countries trending downward. All their growth is below zero. All of them are seeing fewer new cases, or will. The trend says they will see fewer new cases. If they've just crossed the line, they might still have a few data points above, like, let's take one at random, Germany. Germany has not had it that great, and they've had quite a few days of growth recently, but the last 2 days have been good. And as this trend line drops, if this trend line continues to drop, it'll probably drop more sharply. Then we'll see more and more of the specific data points showing below zero, indicating that there's a reduction of growth in new cases in Germany. By the way, feel free to drop something in the chat. I'm going to say something right here. Ask me questions here. You can also see what the delay is then. I think there's a 5-second delay or something before things actually show up. Oh, here's my new graph. So this graph really has to be taken, we're going to take off our scientist hat for a minute here and not read too much into this graph. And I'll tell you why. What I've done here, all I've done here, is I've taken all of the world's percentage growths day over day. If one country has dropped 1% and another country's gone up 2%, throw them into this graph and it's going to say, okay, that's 0. But it doesn't take population into account. And so the little countries and the big countries are all weighted the same in this graph. So because of that, we can't say too much about what this means, but we can still, eyeballing this graph, say, generally speaking, the growth rates on all the countries were higher here. Almost all of them were above 0. Generally speaking, the growth rates in daily cases on all the countries in the most recent days are below 0 now. And so we see this trend line, which is attempting to take this mess of dots and say, what's the general picture here of the whole world? And hurrah, the general picture is the world is turning the corner right now. The world as a whole, again, recognizing we're not taking population into account, but considering all countries equally, egalitarian graph says we are crossing 0 now, and the epidemic, the pandemic, I always talk about the epidemic in this country is turning the corner, or the epidemic's turning the corner. I can say with limited accuracy because of the population thing that the pandemic is actually turning the corner now, that the whole world is crossing 0, and generally we can expect the growth in new cases of the whole world to start to drop. Now, if I have the time, maybe I'll take it and actually take a look at adjusting this by population, and then I could say it with a little more certainty. But since these are just the top 25 anyway, there is at least a factor of population adjusting happening here. We can't just have a 500% growth in some tiny island nation somewhere, pull the whole curve off. These are all the big countries in terms of the pandemic. And as a whole, these countries have been heading downward since about March 13th and are now hitting 0. So hooray, this is the first stage. Of course, it doesn't mean we can all run outside and give smooches to strangers. There's a lot of time still to be spent in recovering. The healthcare systems are still overloaded. There will be probably a continued rise in deaths. Even though this drops below 0, the deaths lag. There still needs to be testing so that we don't get a whole new waves from people we didn't know had the disease. There still needs to be shelter in place where it can be done, or in places like Georgia where they're sort of sheltering in place. There are still the rules and the restrictions, and generally the sense that people can just be sensible about this and not run outside and smooch strangers, even if the law allows it, because it wouldn't be a good idea for the population as a whole and for the growth of the epidemic. So with all those caveats, this is good news. This is the moment we've been waiting for. The first evidence that the world as a whole is really turning around. Give it a few more days. We've seen graphs like this for the United States that turned out to be days early or worse. So maybe India may show up suddenly and blow this all out of proportion. Though again, not being just adjusted by population, India isn't going to have a huge effect. It'll only be one of these dots. Someday we'll get a population adjusted one. Deaths by country. New deaths by country, not total deaths. I guess I could make a total deaths graph too, like I did for the other total thing. Something interesting is happening here. Did I just get interrupted by a coronavirus briefing? Well, this still seems to be streaming, so I'm going to assume that that's okay. I hope it's okay. If anybody can see me. No, I don't want the coronavirus briefing. Why did this take me to the coronavirus briefing? All right, it seems all right. I think I'm still streaming. It was just my own YouTube channel decided that I needed a coronavirus briefing. And one is coming soon, so maybe you want to watch that after this. So the total, I'm going to just do total deaths per million. And then the chart. In deaths per million, Spain leads, but look at that, flat. It's flat. Deaths per million seem to have flattened out in Spain and seem to be headed down. Italy also, the other epicenter of Europe, flattened out days ago and is headed down. These are the deaths. These are not even the cases. The number of deaths is flattening out. So hopefully we're going to see the load on the healthcare systems there lighten up as well. France, however, Belgium, United Kingdom continue to grow. Let's take a look at this in the rope chart. Canada, oddly, is kind of off the chart here with a 34% growth rate of deaths. Interesting. I'm not going to speculate too much on that one. I'm going to look at the main cluster. Well, actually, the main cluster. First of all, notice the rope. I think as recently as yesterday, we looked at the rope and said, that seems kind of flat. It's probably going horizontal. Now I see the rope has got some cohesion. It's interesting to me how closely all these countries track each other. There's Canada up there, and there's Turkey sometimes way out in the boonies, but these are all following a very, very much the same trend line, or at least they're weaving together within the same envelope. You may see things like this one. Let's take a look. Who are you? I'm going to zoom in. There are some that are going up for sure. There are still a lot that have rising death rates. Chile is maybe the worst in terms of the rising death rates. Israel, rising number of new deaths per day. Iran, Australia, rising deaths per day, which is interesting because they have such a good number of a good decrease in new cases per day, but their deaths per day are still rising. And then there's Canada up there, but that's actually most of them. Did I actually get four countries that have rising deaths? Rising growth of deaths, not to be confused with rising deaths. Everyone above this line has rising deaths, has more deaths every day. The ones below this line, including Italy and Spain, have fewer new deaths each day, which is great. But these ones still have more deaths each day, and so that's a challenge. And until everyone drops below zero, or until any particular country drops below zero, we're not really going to see the healthcare system get a break. But the nice thing in this graph, the trend that I see just eyeballing it, is that almost all of these are headed down. So almost all these countries are seeing a trend towards having fewer deaths each day. The growth in new deaths each day is dropping, and that's good news. So now I'm going to go on to the states. Those of you who are here for just the countries, thanks for listening. I'm going to the states of the United States. Okay, so this may look a little bit like Friday. Friday I went through this whole thing. I think I actually ended up taking down my video on Saturday maybe for this similar reason. No, Friday was the day when my dashboards were broken. Saturday is what this may remind you of if you happen to be a long-time listener. I went through this analysis and said, oh look, isn't everything looking great in the state level? And then I realized that certain states, like in this case New York, were reporting the exact same number of cases on, say, April 5th as they were on April 4th. That's not right. I can say with certainty we are not seeing the same, that New York had at least one new coronavirus case today. So New York's numbers are wrong here, and last time this happened I said, oh, it looks like the whole Corona data scraper thing isn't updated for the latest day, or maybe it's not updated for today, it only has yesterday, and it took me a day to recover from that one. Today is not generally the case. If we zoom in on more of these, we see that, for instance, Georgia, 6383 becomes 6742, or California, the latest day is bigger than the last day. So for most states, the data here is okay, but we can't trust New York's numbers this time around, because my algorithm here is assuming that we had absolutely no new cases in New York today. And by the way, New Jersey seems to have a similar problem today. The two biggest ones have not reported data today. As I mentioned earlier, the New York's what website? New NYC Health website, which has this data also. It has not zero, but it has low numbers, and it has this notice there that says because of delays in reporting, the data is not up to date today. So I'm just going to ignore New York and New Jersey. However, that doesn't mean that the analysis made of the United States yesterday is necessarily wrong. Not yesterday, in the last tab, in the last segment. It doesn't mean that that's necessarily wrong. It might be if it's basing it on this data, but I don't think it is from what I see of the CDC data, which appears to be independent. I believe that there actually has been a drop of 10,000 new cases in the United States today. And that being the case, we can probably trust those United States numbers from the last segment. But with a grain of salt, because of this, the two biggest contributors are having some sort of reporting problems today that may have affected the total number. We'll find out tomorrow. Hopefully tomorrow, if it was wrong today, it will be corrected, and we'll see that maybe New York is somewhere up here, or if we're really lucky, it'll be somewhere here. And so here we have the daily cases. Again, New York claiming 0 new cases, New Jersey claiming 0 new cases. This graph, this trend line can't remotely be trusted because 3 days in a row now, New Jersey has claimed 0 new cases in this data set, so I'm not going to be able to do much with them. But I'll carry on as I can. It's just ignore New York and New Jersey and say, what do we got? Well, what we got is Louisiana. Sadly, Louisiana has had a couple of very bad days, and Louisiana reports a low number today, but it's not 0, so this probably is a real number, unlike New York and New Jersey. Probably these are all correct. The data are all correct here, and but this is such a spread. The trend line is sort of just guessing where it might be headed. We'll have to wait a few days on this. Very high, very low, very high, very low. It could just be that it's reporting 2 days of data and then only half a day, or 1.5 days of data and half a day of data. Something could be going on with reporting. That will all be handled by the trend line in the long haul, and it really already kind of is. This is the real trend line, even if we shift these numbers around a little bit, or at least it's close. But Louisiana is the worst here in terms of new cases per capita. So comparing to other states, Louisiana is having the biggest problem. Massachusetts, Michigan, Connecticut, Pennsylvania are the other big ones. Then to the rope chart. This is probably, New Jersey. Don't believe that one. And New York will take out as well. The trend line then for the remaining states is clearly downward. There are actually almost none upward. Let's see if there are any upward at this point. No, not a single state is trending upward now. Some of them are sharply downward. Michigan is doing very well in decreasing its growth rate. 15% fewer cases each day. North Carolina, 13% new cases each day. Washington State, 9% reduction of new cases each day. Georgia, by the way, I'm watching this closely because Georgia, again, has taken this position, kind of like the UK and Brazil, of saying, we don't know why we have to lock in place. Let's just all be reasonable. And I like to see someone out there trying that. I don't know that it's a good idea, but if without this data point, we can't do anything resembling a controlled experiment about whether shelter in place is actually effective for the next pandemic. Please don't take this as any sort of advice not to shelter in place. I'm sheltering in place. I'm making my kids shelter in place. Everyone please shelter in place if ordered, but if you're in Georgia, you're not ordered, so feel free to go to those open beaches and enjoy yourself 6 feet from everyone else. And so Georgia, in spite of not sheltering in place, on a statewide level anyway, is doing very well. 20% growth in new cases. 10% growth in new cases on its most recent days. Georgia is doing very well. Oops, I turned those on again by mistake. So that's Georgia. And then Washington also, which was the first epicenter, never really got terrible by historic perspectives anyway compared to the other states, and now it seems to be getting better. Missouri, Missouri is doing very well, trending downward 8% a day. And then there's a cluster of several others, including Colorado, which have also turned the corner and are seeing lower growth of cases on average every day. I'll just take a quick zoom in on that little group of just barely turned the corner states: Colorado, Tennessee, Massachusetts, South Carolina. All of them have turned the corner, if trends continue, and are heading down and are having negative growth. These other ones are all heading downward, but they still have positive growth. They're all above zero. And so we have, I'm going to get a little bit better handle on that. We have the worst ones: Pennsylvania, Alabama, Louisiana, Illinois, Maryland. But even a week ago, I've only been doing this for a week or two, even a week ago, there was nothing like this. We didn't see these states that were all getting better. There was always someone way up in the 30s, and they were going higher every day. But nationwide, across the United States, all states are getting a hold of their epidemic, as far as I can tell from these trends. Everyone is trending towards zero growth. Some of them very slowly, like Arizona. And this one here with Alabama, it's probably even trending slightly upwards. Maybe not, but and yeah, this one as well. Illinois is flat. Illinois actually isn't doing that well. It's got a 10% growth rate, and it's not getting any better. But we're expecting Chicago might be an epicenter. We're expecting Detroit might be an epicenter. And yet, when you actually look at Michigan, Detroit does not seem to be running away with the game here. So that's really just good news all across the board, especially in New York and New Jersey, if you believe this data, but sadly, we can't believe this data. So, we can't believe the New York and New Jersey data. I do believe the rest of it. In New York and New Jersey, they're not terribly far off, because they only have one day of bad data at this point. They still have to follow their trends for all the rest of the days. But when it shows that New York has turned the corner, I say, well, maybe. It did have another below zero day yesterday, but I do think that when the numbers actually come in, this day is going to be below zero, but it's not as below zero as it says. It's not to be trusted yet. New York is still incorrectly reporting zero new cases. And let's look quickly at testing. In testing, we have New York leading in testing still, 1.5%. I should just change this to be in percent of total population, because it's kind of hard to read this, but 15,000 per million, 1.5% of New York's entire population has been tested. That's cool. Louisiana also, 1.3% of their population tested. Washington, 1.2%. Massachusetts, 1%. New Jersey, 0.8%. Lots of states doing well. Now, I haven't even looked at California, but I'm very interested, because yesterday they showed one good data point. Oh, look at that. That's so exciting. I'm so excited. California, which had been in the dumper in its testing 900 out of every million when other states are doing 10,000, had promised us 2 days ago that it was going to pick up. They're going to pick up their testing. They have the new antibody Stanford test, and I don't think that's actually online yet, probably, but they promised that they'd finally gotten everything lined up to do testing, using whatever tests they're using. And indeed, now we're seeing not great testing, 3,000 per million. Remember, we just saw 14,000 per million, 15,000 per million, but California has, 15 times more or something? It has greatly increased, maybe not 15 times more, 6 times more. It has greatly increased its testing rate. No, it's really just 3 times more. Well, I just can't do math. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong line. Yeah, so from 1,000 to 3,000. We go from 1,000 tested per million up to 3,000 tested per million, which, as any elementary calculus student can tell you, is 3. Factor of 3, 2 days in a row, still heading upwards. Good news for California. Now, as we saw, California is not looking so bad. It's 1% growth, and it's still above. It still has positive growth, but 1%. And a couple of good days, and the trend line is pretty clearly down here. So, with testing online, that may improve even more. Shelter in place is is in place, and so that hopefully is helping a lot, and we should see California turn things around. I don't care about new testing per million. Okay. Finally, we go to the California counties dashboard. So, not if you can possibly avoid it. I'm literally live streaming now.
I'm 9%.
Fine. All right. My son is at 9%, so we're going to unplug my computer. I'm at 100%, so this should be okay. Hopefully, it won't hurt the performance too much. So, maybe I should get another charger, but I left mine somewhere. So here we are in the cases by county. Los Angeles, total cases still leads the pack by a long shot. San Diego and Santa Clara. More interesting are the new cases per day. Los Angeles still leads. Even more interesting are the per capita cases. I seem to recall that Los Angeles wasn't leading in per capita. Maybe it always has been, but in any case, it is leading now, and it's only about 20% up from the next place. San Mateo, though, is close. Riverside, a few of the smaller counties. San Francisco, not so small. All of them trending upward. But let's go to the rope chart, the one that I like best, as I may have mentioned. So, California, actually, let's look at the big picture. Lo and behold, the rope chart, it is a firm rope here. It's not, we don't have any outliers, really. Everything's within this nice envelope from the worst, which is around Tulare, to the best, which is Fresno. And we see all of them trending downward in their total growth and their growth rate of new cases per day. So, and in fact, it's clear today that most of the counties, and these are the top counties, I believe, maybe these are all the counties. Most of the counties here are below zero. Most counties on this list have negative growth of new cases per day. So California as a whole is looking pretty good. Now let's hop back here and see again. I think we just did this, but back in the, so here we see California. It's looking to turn the corner today. It seems to be turning the corner today. Not quite there. Gradually tilting downward, and we would expect to see about the same shape of this, and we do. Slightly downward, hitting zero around now. When you look at it by county, it looks a little better than looking at the whole state. It really does look like most of the state is below zero and only 40% or something is above. That's probably because the population of these ones are larger than the population of those ones. But good news anyway, most of the states are trending downward. Now the bad news here is that unlike the states, was it the states? Or was it the countries? Unlike something, doesn't matter what, this has upward trend lines for quite a few states, for a few counties. We see an upward trend of Alameda continuing. Alameda is the worst in having a 20% growth rate, but it's getting worse. The growth rate is getting worse. We see Sacramento County also near the top with more than 10% growth rate, but it's getting worse. And we see this one here, Santa Clara, which has been doing okay. It still has a negative growth rate, but it's not heading downward in this nice sharp way that the others are. It's even heading a little bit upward. So Santa Clara has the potential, if this trend continues, to turn back around the corner and go back into positive growth. We'll be watching Santa Clara County. But most of these counties are trending downward, I think. Contra Costa, Monterey, slightly upward, but we certainly do see a broad trend of the whole rope heading downward. The best ones, again, Fresno, or I don't think that's again because I don't think I've said it this time. Fresno, San Bernardino, Solano, San Luis Obispo, Placer, Sonoma. A lot of the littler counties are getting over this already. And I think this points to something, there is some sort of a correlation here to population density. You look at New York City and look at how it took off, and you think that's probably because they have so many people packed together. You look at Fresno isn't that small, but some of the counties that are that are less populous, they're going to have fewer people, and more small towns, and more room between them. And so though they may have many epicenters in some of their cities or larger towns, it's not going to spread quite as easily. And so that is probably why these small counties, I hypothesize that's why these small counties are doing better. But let's just look at the big ones. These are the ones that affect the trend of the state the most. Let's do a few more. It's really a mixed bag right now. We got 5 going upwards, or 4 going upwards, 4 going downwards, and one that's flat. So it is possible to believe, looking at this, that the trend is downward, given that these are the ones that are contributing the most to it, but that it's probably a little above 0, and that is what we see at the state level. Trend is downward, a little above 0. Not quite turned the corner, but a lot of counties looking pretty good, and a few not so much. But Los Angeles County, which was looking terrible, yes, I haven't focused in on Los Angeles County. Very interesting. Los Angeles County is as we've seen, is the worst by far. It's been going up on this graph, I think, even until today. Maybe yesterday it was flat, but obviously these points were it looked a few days ago, 3 days ago, it looked like it was heading to the sky. And now look at it, it's turned the corner, or not, it's turned that corner, the third derivative corner. It is heading downward here to, I won't talk calculus next time. I especially wanted to throw it in for my sister Cheryl, just in case she sees it. It's turning this corner where this flattens out and heads down towards 0. And that is great news for Los Angeles. For the past 3 days ago, or many days actually, I've been yelling at California for not doing testing. I've been yelling at Los Angeles for being way higher than everyone else. But now California is doing testing, and now Los Angeles County is heading towards 0 and pretty close to it, with only a 8% growth rate on this latest data point. Coincidence? Testing and lower growth of the growth rate? I don't think so. So that's the county news, that's the state news, that's the country news. My name's Greg Farrar. Thanks to Joby Aviation for funding this, and thanks to those who provided this, the data that I put into here, and the various tools, Databricks and Plotly, that provided the software tools that I've used to generate these. I'm still trying to make these available. There's really no reason these can't be available on a public website, and I'm trying. I need to get it through IT, the IT department of my company. It's been approved, but just to get me access to write to one of the public pages of our website is a challenge. I think it'll be happening in days. We'll see. But I do keep trying to make this available. Then you can all explore it, which would be lots of fun. And if that ever happens, I might also try to figure out a way to let you flip some big switch here and say which state we're looking at, so you can look at counties. And maybe we could even do the same for states, regions within countries. But I certainly, Corona Data Scraper does have data for all counties of the United States. And so I could rather easily make a single other spreadsheet for, say, Texas, but I can't make 50 easily. So I'd like to just have some menu here where I can choose Texas, and boom, the whole dashboard changes. I will especially try to do that, though, if because I don't particularly care about the counties of Texas, because I don't know the counties of Texas, but those who live there do, and so if I do make it live, I'll try to make that available to people. Thanks for listening. If you like this, like it. Subscribe if you want to get more of these and be notified. Tell your friends if you like it, if you think that people would like it. Obviously, something that's been a theme here is this is I am shining a ray of hope in a dark time. I feel like the analysis I'm doing isn't being done by others. Some think that it's overly optimistic, but I think that we've had enough days now to see that the trends that I'm pointing to really do come to pass, with the obvious exception of the United States, which didn't turn the corner when I thought it would. But you can look at these, just looking at, well, the counties are going down, the states are going down, and maybe above all, the countries are recovering. That's hopeful, and I don't see this graph other places. I'm glad to share it. It is real data. These are real trends. We really are coming out of this pandemic. And if you have other people who need a ray of hope in their shelter-in-place moments, please pass this on. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for listening.